you know what's so crazy too? When you look at now, like the guy who's the head of the World Health Organization, he tried to say we never made anybody take anything, and we didn't make
Yeah.
you guys, you didn't have to work. We didn't make you go to work. You didn't have to. And I'm like, these people, like, they literally think we're idiots. And one thing people don't realize, the people have the power. It's not a group of these elite people that have these super big ass brains, and they're, dude, the people are the majority. They have the power, but they don't realize it. These people are telling you to stand 6 feet apart, to not go to your relative's house on the holidays, to wear this outside, to not go shop. I mean, really? You want me to sit up in the house all damn day? I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
That
I
shit
mean,
is
that
crazy.
goes. Yeah, there's another book. It's called "Dumbing Us Down" by Sean Taylor Gatto, and he breaks down exactly why American society, in particularly, is acting the way it is acting now. He was a professional educator for over 30 years, and he kind of in the book he blows the whistle on the hidden curriculum of the American education system, the government mandated education system, with that is public schooling. And I love the start of the book, and because the reason I love the start is the perfect example he gives to really attract the reader is during the lead up to the Civil War, prior to the Civil War, well, after, everyone thinks the Civil War was over slavery, right? And granted, it was, but that's because slavery was economic. It was an economic way that the South could economically survive. But more importantly, what the American education system is not teaching is that in the years leading up to the Civil War, federal forces were going into Southern homes and holding families at gunpoint and telling them they have to send their kids to public school, which was another part of the uprising. It was government overreach. And they don't teach that in the American
Do you know
education
another
system.
part? Another part of that. I've read this, but a lot of people don't talk about. Do you know that another part of the Civil War was economically okay? When you had the Declaration of Independence was a financial agreement, right? And then the Constitution was to pay back the debt that they owed. They still owed England from whatever money they borrowed to establish the colonies. And the bankers who were involved in that, I'm not sure what particular families back then. It's probably, um, some of these old families who are currently running the Federal Reserve, but there was a debt. So when you have a default typically is a declaration of war because you're not paying back your debt. It's like collecting on the street with the mob. You don't owe. You get somebody at your door, and then if you want to go the next step, you go to war. It creates a conflict. So every time, if you look at through our history, when there's been a war or anything close to it, it's been almost acting as a collection agency. So when you had basically the Constitution, and then you had Lincoln when he's talking about he's going to start printing greenbacks, which was in conflict with the money that was in circulation, which wasn't complementing the bankers who at the time were being owed this money. So assassination on him, because after following the war, and then you have that new pact, and every time you look at that, there was a pledge. So you initially had a pledge of what particular land, then you had the North and South conflict. Okay, bridge that back together because you can't have two countries. We want our money. You're not paying us if you guys separate. That affects the debt. So booyah, we have that war, but we say it's slavery, and we cover it up with that. Fast forward, you have the War of 1812. Then you have, after that, you have another, which is 100 years, coming 1913. You now, okay, you guys don't want to pay. What's going to be the declaration? That's when they came up with the Federal Reserve Act. That was another compact. Then you fast forward after that, okay, you owe us, there's 20 years in there. 1933, you have the bankruptcy. And so now there's no, you basically, every time they renegotiate, you got to pledge something. So they've already pledged the people. What else is there left to pledge? You got rid of the silver, you got rid of the gold. You pledged the people, because remember, birth certificates didn't start happening in having commercial birth certificates after 1933. So that was another
Mhm.
commercial instrument where people became commoditized. So as you watch the history, all this stuff is about money being owed and collecting money and what is being pledged. And everything, every time you have one of these wars, you're pledging something. Afghanistan war, they pledged some type of land, some type of asset, maybe commercially, the people. And even when you look at the flooding of people into this country, some of them undocumented with no paperwork or nothing, they create a commercial instrument off this person, a fake birth certificate or whatever, social security account. That's money. So they're not just printing the money. They got to have, every time you print money, you got to collateralize it with an asset. All these people coming into the country are collateralized assets. So they're making money off these people too. So if you,
And it's under what's called the system of proportionment. It also allows them to control the elections a little bit.
yes, it's all tied in together. People will be like, oh, that's crazy. But if you just look at like just the pledging and you look at just how things, every time you have a transact, all these things are transactions. Everything's commercial. This is all commercial. And if you look at and understand commercial law and commercial and equity, then all these things all funnel into one thing. And it's like it all adds up. And at the same time, it's complex. It's a part of the matrix, which money, if you look at money, people look at it like they kill for it, they die for it, but it's energy. It's like water. It's always flowing. So you're never gonna you can't, if you put a dam up, water eventually is gonna find a crack or a weakness and go around it. So you can't stop the flow of money. So money's always flowing. It's just who's directing it. Where's it going to go? We're not the only people making money in America. There's other countries that might have inflation, but there's still money moving. There's still commerce. So commerce is the game right now. And I look at it, that's war is just a secondary, it's a secondary action to commerce.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, yeah, commerce definitely drives war, especially like going back to the Federal Reserve. One of the big things that was snuck into World War I is the way they financially restructured the entire banking structure within the United States. And that's where you see the rise in like interest rates and people actually taking out loans and becoming indebted to this new banking system, which is kind of seriously flawed, especially when you look at the payments to the World War I veterans going into 1934 when by 1934, a lot of the World War I veterans weren't even paid. And so they tried to protest in Washington, at which point federal troops mobilized on World War I veterans and actually shot at them. They don't teach that in the history books. But yeah, to go back to like pre-World War or pre-Civil War, when they were talking, like federal soldiers were going into the South and forcing families at gunpoints to send their kids to public schooling, it's because John D. Rockefeller wanted to create a nation of workers and not thinkers. And under that education policy, and that's where he started taking his oil funds and stood up the Department of Education
That
and
was in the
started,
30s, right?
that was like in the 1870s.
The
Well, they
Rockefeller.
didn't stand. He didn't.
You talking about
To rock,
original
so
John D. Rockefeller or Rockefeller?
yeah, no, original John D. Rockefeller. It was his vision. He wanted to. He didn't start to stand up the Department of Education. I misspoke there. He basically started paying out large sums of money to political candidates to basically create public schooling. At which point, those public schools would provide a certain curriculum that kids would have to follow, and in that curriculum, everything became rules based. And that's where we got the testing standard. So kids would have to go to school and listen to rules and pass tests.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why here in like 2020, when things were put out, everyone just blindly followed along. It's because back then we restructured the education system in America via gunpoint, starting with the Civil War.
Well, too, you got to remember when after World War II, when they sent a lot of the women to work, there was, they kind of got rid of homeschooling because now you had additional taxation with the female now being employed, and you had the kid now that was out being babysat by a public institution that was controlled by whatever department, whether it be the Department of Education or the welfare department. They had all these different things. So all that came into play, and it just, it starts with the family and the household. That's why a lot of people I know are going back to homeschooling, but it starts with the family and the household. If the male's not home, you got female raising the family, and then otherwise, if you burden the family with debt, and you got now two people leaving the household, your kids are still left unattended. So either way it goes, the children are the prize. And so the kids are the future. And if you can't somehow provide a child with the resources and exposure, that's the biggest thing. I mean, and that's where a lot of other, a lot of these charter schools and people who are able to put their kids in schools that have private education are winning. And that's why you have in public schools like Washington, where they're saying math is racist because they're saying certain black kids can't do the math, which is bullshit because, going throughout history, there's been a lot of mathematicians who came from Africa and all this other stuff, but it's neither here nor there. But that's just the psychology of how they condition people to be stupid by making it, using DEI stuff, making it racial,
John, in that book, John Taylor Gatto breaks that down as to why, especially within the black community, especially after the 60s, why they started to funnel the black community into the inner city schools and then started feeding those same communities drugs and alcohol. Because if you look at the 1960s and 70s, what did you also have? You had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X rising up and actually defeating the system that was put there. So it is of a lot of people's observance, to include in that book, that they started doing this to break up the black family to gain more control, which it's a shame to say, but when they break it down that way, it makes sense. Especially if you look at like CIA operations that were Operation MK Ultra, where they were kidnapping Americans off the streets and force feeding them drugs to see how they would react, to see if they can gain control over them. And then coincidentally, 10 years later, we have the drug epidemic into inner cities that became the drug crisis of the 1970s and 80s. It really starts to make sense. And then if you correlate that with like what you were talking about, where you have the father and mother going off and doing their own things, you take it one step further, you add alcohol and drugs, and then that literally leaves the kids in usually 9 times out of 10 a very abusive upbringing. And then when they grow up, they perpetuate that same exact problem. But more importantly, it becomes a fear reaction base, and that person that's created off of that lifestyle becomes an asset to the system, because they're never actually set up to get ahead. And it's a wild conundrum that society finds itself.
Oh, man, crazy shit, bro. I mean,
Yeah.
we could probably talk for another 2 hours.
Yeah, we could literally break this down more.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Sometimes I unplug and I just look around and be like, I trip out because of, when you're conscious and you're awake, you see this stuff. And I talked to Cody and Aaron about it. And then you walk through and literally I'm around family members and certain other people, I know friends, and, you're like dumbing yourself down to pretend to act like because the conversations, you can't go too deep because people shut down. But I'm always paying attention. And a lot of stuff I just keep to myself, man. I share it with my wife. I throw a little bit here and there, but I know a lot of people aren't ready for it. And just being able to talk with certain people, man, is so different. But like a lot of people, they look at you crazy, and it's the programming, man. They're locked into a program. And if you disrupt that program, they have like this kill switch within inside that shuts down any other information past that point. And so it's almost to a point where you and I know, and there's people who are there, but for the most part, a lot of people, this shit just goes right over their head.
Yeah, and that literally goes back to the education system we were talking about. Like,
yeah,
they're supposed to be that way. Their sole life that's been engineered for the last 150 years is supposed to be wake up, go to work, come home, eat, go to sleep, wake up, go to work, do the same thing over again. Well, then on top of that, we force feed them entertainment, like sports and entertainment. Like I know more people that know more about sports than they know why we even went to Afghanistan in the first place and what was in Afghanistan or Iraq, especially because Afghanistan, some of them will say 9/11, but why did we go to Iraq also? And a lot of people don't know that, but they can tell me every single player that's on an NFL lineup for any given team that's
Fantasy
their
football,
team.
man.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like what celebrity's doing what or who's marrying who, but they can't tell me the like petrodollar agreement, which is like the most dumbfounding agreement that a lot of people don't know. And I'll say it for the viewers. The petrodollar agreement, which was created in 1973, was an agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia to last 50 years. Saudi Arabia solely trades the US dollar for oil for the entire world. So the US dollar gets value, which creates the petrodollar. Now, what does Saudi Arabia get out of the agreement is anytime they need to, they can utilize United States military power to defend their interests. That was the agreement for the petrodollar. And a lot of Americans don't realize that. But when you realize that, it's like, that's why we committed to Desert Storm. That's why we committed to Iraq round 2.
But if people ever read anything about like the Bushes and about like those like a lot of those families, I read an autobiography about it was about the Prescotts and the Bushes, you know, the family that came together and how it was like a power move because I forgot, I think it was US Oil was one of the families owned that, and then it was. But if you don't know history and like these people who really run the world or run this country and how they're tied into like resources and like you say mineral rights and stuff like that, I mean, you don't really have a clue or understanding. And I couldn't name 1 to 2 people on the Minnesota Vikings or the San Francisco 49ers because I don't watch sports like that. But a lot of people, like you said, that's easy to immerse yourself in that just to be a part of whatever is going on. Like it's almost like they called it back in the day before the fall of Greece, when they would have they would dance themselves into a frenzy and they would have these different things and people would be partying, and the gesture would be doing cartwheels and they're having crazy sex over here and they're over here and they're stabbing this, and they're doing this and all this crazy stuff. But people weren't really thinking, you know, and we're in a time where now I think it's flipped and people are consciously more awake, even though they thought technology was going to be more of a controlling factor. And to a degree it did, but it also woke a lot of these young people up that are doing research, that are putting out information that, you know, you wouldn't have access to. I mean, so I commend a lot of people. Yeah, some of them have been like kind of caught up in the indoctrination stuff and the propaganda, but a lot of people, you know, are putting out information that is very conscious, embedded, and they're not going for the bullshit. They're like really punching holes in a lot of the narrative, which I find it interesting, man. So, I mean, just going forward, even with the knowledge you've shared and a lot of people out there who tap in, you know, they're not getting the millions of views, maybe like some of this other bullshit we see, but people are tuning in. And I think there is a movement of people who are aware of this information and they're not as dumb as, you know, what everybody thinks.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do hope so.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm not a super smart person. I'm very much I read a lot. Like it is not like it's something that's like gifted to me. Like to know some of the things I know, like I have to read. I have to stay on top of it. I do wish I was smarter in that aspect. Like I could just retain information and keep glaze over it and retain it. And just knowing what myself, like how much I have to read into things, I really hope that people are a lot smarter than what's going on right now. And they are keeping ahead of it more than I am, or at least they're smart enough to where they don't have to read and put as much work in it to me as I do. And they can actually just like understand it and glaze over it. But from my observation right now is very few people are actually tracking what's going on and paying attention. Especially like the 2020 election alone, or even this election, the fact that the elections are so tight when it's very black and white. Like You have one side that's trying to control what you're saying. Literally, like the Justice Department arguing about the fact that the First Amendment is creating problems for the government,
I
right?
heard that.
People voted for that.
Well, you know,
A significant portion of people
they voted for
voted for
that,
that.
and the trade-off was abortion. So you know what I mean? You're putting up the First Amendment against an emotion, and it doesn't matter.
Well, and it's not even an emotion. It's an act of accountability, right? It's not hard to literally, like, this is 2024. They've had rubbers for thousands of years, right? Use a rubber.
Well, just
It becomes a matter of accountability.
even on the flip side of that, it's like, man, you mean to tell me everybody's gonna skeet in you? Everybody's skeeting.
Yeah.
I mean, you be telling me like you're worried about that many dudes, and then on top of it, like you said, okay, well, maybe I need to think about the family values aspect. So I'm not gonna have unprotected here, and then on top of that, I mean, my body, my choice. But then you were telling me to go get a jab. So I mean, there's a lot of other things, and like I said, I know this video is gonna be hella, whatever because of the algorithm, but there's a lot of other things that we just look at it, man. It's just like, wow, man, people don't even think, bro. I mean, and like you said, just the basis of freedom of speech, and people like, oh, you don't think that's a big thing? That leads to everything else. You control speech. You could control taking away the right to, the right to bear arms, your right to not incriminate yourself, your right to speak out and have a voice. I mean, there's a lot of other things, and that's why that was number one. The freedom of speech, man. I mean, that's the first attack on anything that is even remnant of a republic. And people don't even understand. We're a republic. We were based on a republic, not a democracy.
Yep. Yeah.
People don't even know what a republic is. What a republic? What is a republic? I mean, dude, do your history, do your research. A republic, it's not a mobocracy, and that's what a democracy leads to. The voice of the masses rather than that of reason and laws. So it's just crazy, and a lot of stuff you put out there, people are going to say stuff, but I mean, as long as we, keep our voices and live by some set of moral code. A lot of people don't have that no more. You willing to speak about what you believe in, and I'm the same way, man. If I kept my mouth shut, man, shit, dude, I'd be at over 1 million views, 1 million followers. But sometimes I can't keep my damn mouth shut, and it just go along with what every other black influencer says or does. If I did what they did, I'd be good. But I'm not. I'm not that type of. I've never been that type of dude, man.
Yeah, I used to semi be that type of dude, just stoic. Like when I was in my first my first recon team, I was very stoic, like didn't speak, because you shouldn't. When you show up to a special operations team, you should shut the fuck up and learn for at least the first 6 months. Like you shouldn't be saying anything. And then even as a Green Beret, like deploying into Afghanistan, we were almost done with our Afghanistan deployment, and one of the dudes from another team walks up to me. He's like, dude, you realize you're not a new guy anymore. You can talk, right? It's like, I'm just observing. But when I got home and got scrutiny for not getting the vaccine or not wanting to get the vaccine, the gloves came off. I became probably the loudest spoken E6 in the Army. Like I didn't care. I really took it. I did take that very personal when they were looking at me like I'm the biggest piece of shit for not wanting to partake in an experiment that was heavily flawed and on a very fraudulent company like Pfizer. And I say that looking at the goodbusiness.org. If you go to that website, you can see Pfizer and how much money they owe for fraudulent claims since 2000, which is somewhere in the upwards of like $7 billion or $700 million. It's a 7, not just million. It is in the hundreds of millions or billion. And then they go through a different total of a bunch of other things that Pfizer is fraudulent for. But yeah, absolutely wild times we're living in. Going ahead.
How can people find you on social media?
So my name on Instagram is Z_the_communicator. or if you just type in Zeth, I'm one of the dudes that just pops up. I just started an X or a Twitter today that I'm going to start uploading some of the papers I write into the articles platform as I'm going through school and talking about these things. But yeah, and that's just where I'm at right now. Because Instagram, I've noticed I've done my own algorithms check. I'll see it in the stories. Like I'll post something. I'll go a week of not posting. I'll post one thing that is not political. It'll have like 160 to like 200 views. And then the very next day, I'll post something that's political, that's very much right leaning. And it'll have like 7 people over the course of 24 hours will view it. And I'm like, huh, that's very much algorithm based. And then my girlfriend showed me that earlier this year in 2024, I've got the screenshots on my phone, but Instagram actually rewrote the settings in your Instagram that automatically block political posts that you're not following. So if you don't follow the person and they send you, then they put out a political post, you won't see it. And it's automatically turned on in your Instagram settings. So like if you're trying to do political talk or things like that and try to grow your account, it's pretty much impossible right now if those settings are on to the masses. And I've been kind of playing with those algorithms on Instagram, but I'm switching to X to try to talk these things out more because X isn't controlled. It's controlled by Elon Musk, and dude he's all about the First Amendment. Yeah, those dudes are dope. Yeah, no, I appreciate you too. All right, dude. You too, brother. Appreciate you. Yep. I'll see you, brother. How's this?